Welcome, friends, to American Zarathustra. I am so happy to have back friend and author Spencer J. Quinn. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Oh, fabulous. This is so great to have you back. I'm happy to celebrate and promote your new book. Last time you were with me, we discussed your science fiction book, Charity's Blade. And that I can leave the show link to that below. That's a fantastic show. Also, Spencer was on Conversations with the Wind with my friend and co-host Nullis on Imperium Art. Have you been working hard since then?
Oh, always. I mean,
Excellent.
I work hard in my normie job. I work hard with my family, and I work hard producing content for Countercurrents. I'm also working on my next novel.
Marvelous. That's what I wanted to do is just, let the audience get to know you, refresh themselves a little bit. Tell us a little bit about your publishing history.
Okay, well, I started working or really writing for Countercurrents March 2016. They
Mhm.
published my first novel, White Like You, and I've been you know, putting out one article a week, pretty much, maybe a little more than that, for them since then.
Wow.
Uh, and I've published a novel called Charity's Blade
Mm.
with a publisher called the Free Speech Library. That's a dystopian dystopian future novel that takes
Mhm.
place after an American Civil War.
Mhm.
Then I also published a children's book for little kids, like a board book for the White People Press called My Mirror Tells a Story.
Wonderful.
And this year, excuse me, I published Solzhenitsyn and the Right with Antelope Hill, and I've been very happy with how the book looks, how they've been dealing with it, and how they've been promoting it and stuff. And it's
Mhm.
so far turning out to be a big success. We're pretty happy with it.
Oh my God, that's fabulous. When exactly was it put out?
Late August.
Wonderful. Wow. So yeah, I haven't really heard anything about it until recently when we got in touch. And I'll tell you up front, I'm not well educated on Solzhenitsyn. I know who he is. I've seen a lot of his kind of quotes and things that he's done. He's obviously a really colossal figure on the right. We know that he survived the gulags in Russia. I believe he wrote the Gulag Archipelago. Am I correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and so he's a really major figure in the right wing and sort of the anti-communist movement. So could you give us more background about him and who he is, and his whole deal, and then we'll
Sure.
go into your book. Yeah.
Well, I mean, he was born in 1918, I believe, and he started out as a true believer in communism, and I think, an officer, or actually, I'm not sure what rank he was in when he was fighting in World War II for the Soviets in the Red Army.
Mhm.
And he got arrested by,
Mm.
I believe, the NKVD at the time for criticizing Stalin in a letter to a friend.
Mm.
And for that offense, he spent 8 years in a gulag.
Cool.
Um, and at that point, he was already a dedicated writer. He had already decided at that point, okay, I'm going to write all these massive tomes.
Yeah.
But once they put him in the gulag, he had a lot of things now that he could write about.
Yeah.
And so what he would do is he would memorize a lot of the works that he would want to get published in poetry and plays. And some of the plays actually survive, and he was able to actually memorize this stuff and find ways to smuggle it out
Mm.
or keep it. And they wouldn't allow you to have pieces of paper in the
Oh.
gulag. So well, anyway, he also contracted cancer. That he's well known as a cancer survivor, and it would look pretty grim. He went to a hospital. I think it was somewhere in Central Asia. It might be Kazakhstan. I'm not sure, but
Mhm.
it's in Central Asia. It's like a big, vast, a big, vast nowhere place. It's what it seemed like to him.
Mhm.
And he was released after the cancer scare, and from there he started writing One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. And I think I couldn't believe it. I think if I remember correctly, in his memoir, The Oak and the Calf, he said it was like he managed to write the whole thing in 8 pages, but he would write it in just such tiny Cyrillic script and with no margins. I mean, because when you're in the Gulag, you have to write just very tiny script.
Wow.
And so he managed to have all these ways of trying to fool the authorities and stuff. So anyway, he gets it published in Novi Mir, which is a magazine, very progressive magazine at the time, and it was during the Khrushchev thaw. So Stalin was dead, and Khrushchev was like, "Okay, well, we're going to reverse some of these policies. We're going to open up a little bit. We're not going to be as bad as we were." And so, in that lucky window, Solzhenitsyn snuck in one day in the life. And but while he was doing that, he had a bunch of other things, other stories that and other things that he wrote that he wanted to keep hidden because he knew the authorities wouldn't approve, like the Gulag Archipelago. And so, you know, he built up a network of friends called Invisible Allies, because a lot of these people, you know, couldn't afford to be doxxed, because, you know, if we get doxxed, we may lose our careers, we may lose our PayPal accounts. But, you know, you get doxxed in the Soviet Union, you could be shot, or you could be in, you know, in a gulag above the Arctic Circle. I mean, who knows? I mean, it's just unbelievable. And so, you know, he built up this network of people that would, you know, help hide the drafts of the Gulag Archipelago or Prussian Knights, which was, you know, you wouldn't want the Russian or the Soviet authorities to read about that, and other things too. And, you know, he published a few other shorter works. And then I think at some point the Khrushchev thaw ended. I'm fuzzy on the actual history, but things got a little dicier for him, you know, pretty quickly. And the KG, I think one of his friends might have lent a copy of one of his works to another friend, who lent it to another friend, who made a copy of it, and then the KGB got a hold of it. And so then he was on the KGB's radar. They tried to assassinate him at one point.
Wow.
Somebody walked behind him in a shop and stuck him in the leg with like a really tiny needle. And Solzhenitsyn was sick for 3 weeks, but he didn't die, obviously. And then he was proving to be such an embarrassment, I think, because maybe cancer ward was made it to the West while he was still in the Soviet Union. I think that's what it was, but it could have been something else. He was proving to be such an embarrassment to the Soviet Union that, and maybe also his he got the Nobel Prize for literature for One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. And so he was already a world famous person at the time of his exile. And what, like, for example, you know, he was tooling around Moscow at one point, and Jean-Paul Sartre was there, and he wanted to meet Solzhenitsyn.
Wow.
Because Solzhenitsyn was that well known in like 1969.
That's incredible.
And and Solzhenitsyn said, "Hell no, I'm not talking to you." He's like, he called him a wandering minstrel of humanism in his book. I thought that was hilarious. It's like, I'm not talking to him. No, forget it. And then so the Soviet authorities had enough, because, you know, he was by that point, by the early 70s, he was a world-known figure. He received the Nobel Prize. It was extremely embarrassing for them, and they couldn't kill him anymore, at least not very easily, because he was really well-known in the West, and he was turning into kind of a hero. So they said, okay, out you go. And he went to Switzerland, and he spent 20 years in exile there. And during that time, that's when the Gulag Archipelago came out. That's when Lenin in Zurich came out. That's when August 1914, and all his other major works. He did lectures. He spoke at the Harvard Address, made a lot of enemies. First, you know, he opposed the liberal establishment. He was not a liberal. And so, you know, he had a lot of critical things to say about the United States, especially in his Harvard Address. And he constantly pressured the government to, you know, have a real hardline policy against the Soviets, which rankled the Democrats, of course. And so then, you know, August, he started to gain a lot of enemies, especially among the Jews, because they were noticing that he was producing works that, you know, didn't exactly reflect positively on them. And then when August 1914 came out with the added chapters of Stolypin and Bolgrove and all that drama. Oh boy, they really went after him after that. And at that point, he wasn't quite the hero that he started out to be, at least in Western eyes. And then when the Soviet Union fell, he returned to Russia, and he wrote 200 Years Together. I didn't really study too much of his post-America life, because he doesn't have memoirs published in English that go past 1992, so I really can't speak too much about it. I know that I don't know if he approved wholeheartedly of Putin, but he invited Putin to his home at one point and had a nice chat with him. I know he chatted with David Duke at one point.
Wow. That's
yeah. And, during this time, 200 Years Together was published. A collection of short stories called Apricot Jam was published, and he died in 2008.
Wow, man, that's quite a run right there. I think minus the Gulag stuff, you want to live a life where there's a legacy, and you want to do something that teaches people in future generations, but it's not really worth anything if future generations don't listen. And so when people like yourself come along and write a book that analyzes his work and recontextualizes it for us today, this is such important work, and this is why I'm really honored to have you on the show. So if we could maybe start off just by asking, what inspired you to write a book about Solzhenitsyn? What's the connection?
Okay.
Yeah, if you want.
Well, it started around 2014. I was doing research for my novel White Like You, and I heard rumblings about this book by a Jewish author named Benjamin Ginsberg, and it was called The Fatal Embrace. And it's an excellent book. But one thing that was really striking about it was that he just very casually mentioned the Jewish complicity in the deaths of millions of people in the Soviet Union during the 20s and 30s. And he just sort of talks about it like it's no big deal. I shouldn't say that. I mean, I'm not saying that the author was distancing himself or anything, or trying to justify it, but he mentioned it fairly matter-of-factly that there were Jewish assassins, Jewish hangmen, Jewish commissars, and high-level Soviets that were responsible for quite a few deaths, like enough to be atrocity level. And I was shocked at this. I mean, I knew about the Ukrainian the Holodomor and the terror famines, but I didn't know anything else, and I didn't know the Jewish complicity in that and in the Gulag system. So I said, okay, well, what's the source of this? And I look, and the source was Louis Rappaport's Stalin's War Against the Jews. So I went ahead and bought that, and there was a good source because it said basically the same thing. But I'm like, okay, well, where did Rappaport get his sources from? So then I look it up, and boom, Gulag Archipelago. He got it from the abridged version, and I thought, oh, okay, that's great. I have the Gulag Archipelago. I can go ahead and read it, and I don't even have the abridged version. So I grab it from my library, and I hadn't looked at it in like 10 years. I got that old paperback that is worth like $3.95 that was sold in 1974. Because Solzhenitsyn insisted on low prices because he wanted as many people as possible to be able to afford to buy it, and all the money went to Gulag prisoners. There's like a Gulag Archipelago fund. I don't think Solzhenitsyn made any money off of that book. So I look at it, and I'm like, oh, I agree. It's a thick book. It's like 660 pages. I'm like, okay, I can read this. And then I look at it, and it says Volume 1 of 3. I was like, oh darn! I guess I have to read all of it. So I did.
Welcome to Russian literature.
Yeah, right.
Can I stop for a second, though? I want to back up a little bit. And our audience generally is fairly well educated on the JQ and these things. But for people who might be new to you and this topic, what is the relationship to the Jews, with the Jews to Russian communism? What's the connection?
I mean, I can opine on it. I'm sure there are other. I'm sure that Mark Weber or F. Roger Devlin could probably give you a better answer. But as far as I understand it, and Solzhenitsyn is my major source on this, the radical left-wing politics was extremely attractive to young Jewish people starting as early as the 1880s, and they went to it in droves. And they were also never really punished for that by their community. Their community tolerated it. and they would join these terrorist groups and commit acts of terror. And Solzhenitsyn talks about, they killed the mayor of this town. They tried to kill the governor here. They tried to kill this person there, and they managed to assassinate someone there. I mean, there was a lot of it. And, they just were very fervent about it. They were also very smart and well organized. And one managed to murder Pyotr Stolypin, the great statesman and prime minister of Russia in 1911, who actually managed to keep Russia out of war during the time, and he'd done great things for Russia, but because he was very pro-Russia, he wasn't really anti-Jewish or anything, but he was pro-Russia. That was intolerable to these people. Like, how dare the Russians run Russia? How dare the Russians rule Russia? No,
right.
We can't have that.
How dare the Americans rule America and the Chinese rule China?
Right. So that was, so this pro-Russian patriotism offended this Jewish character, Mordecai Bogrov, who went ahead and killed. And keep in mind that there were something like 8 or 10 assassination attempts prior on Stolypin prior to this one, and they all failed. Although one of them crippled his daughter. The Tsar was very weak. And, he just would go wherever the wind blows. And so, he began to loosen the strict rules of Russia. And he announced that he was open to equality with the Jews, or the Jewish equality. He was open to liberalism. And so he formed the Duma. And sure enough, the Duma was packed to the gills with leftists who just spoke the most horrific things about Russia, about the Tsar and stuff like that. They were just... I have to say this. I mean, maybe they're not quite as bad now as they were then, but radical left-wing movements were very Jewish, at least 50%, which I think is what the prime minister prior to Stolypin told, who was Theodore Herzl, one of the founders of Zionism, saying, your people are responsible for 50% of our radical left-wing movements, 50%. I don't know what Herzl said in response to that, but it was just very attractive to them. And what it offered was maybe an escape from whatever kind of oppressive Judaism they didn't want to deal with. But it also gave them the opportunity to seize power and to, have the kind of opportunities that they didn't have before. Now, some of this is legit. Like, Jews were discriminated against. They were in the pale of settlement and stuff. And so, if you were Jewish and really bright, say as a physicist or a doctor or something like that, you would have to, you would have much more difficulty practicing your profession than your Russian counterpart. Fair enough. But at the same time, if you had the will to power, if you wanted to run things, if you wanted to change things, oh boy, left-wing politics was for you. Because the first thing it promotes is egalitarianism, and then it promotes anti-Semitism, and that's music to their ears. They were extremely excited about all of this, and they, as soon as it looked like the revolution, the first revolution would work, the Jews who were in the cities, because prior to 1914 they were mostly in the countryside or they were in the Pale, and when Russia was fighting the Germans, they evacuated many of the Jews to the cities. I think that's because they didn't want the Jews to die. I mean, because they were in dangerous places. I mean, but I don't know. I've heard people say bad things about the evacuation too. I don't know. But the fact remains is that by 1917, a lot of Jews lived in the cities of Russia, like St. Petersburg. There were a lot of them. And once they realized that this revolution was real and it was happening, oh boy, did they jump into it with both feet. And they did it with both the February and the October Revolution. In fact, Lenin has a quote that is quoted by Yuri Slezkine in his, I'm getting the book now, in his Jewish Century on page 224, as Lenin said, quote, "The fact that there were many Jewish intelligentsia members in the Russian cities was of great importance to the revolution. They put an end to the general sabotage that we were confronted with after the October Revolution. The Jewish elements were mobilized and thus saved the revolution at a difficult time. It was only thanks to this pool of a rational and literate labor force that we succeeded in taking over the state apparatus," end quote. So they were maybe they weren't they were instrumental in forming the most murderous nation in the history of civilization at that point.
Wow. Whew.
I mean, if I were Jewish, I'd be ashamed of that. If I were Jewish, I'd say, "Oh God, I feel really guilty."
Yeah.
You know, they talk about Jewish guilt a lot, about who, you know.
Oh, we lost you a little bit there. Your mic is kind of muted. If you can rearrange it.
Hello?
Yeah, now you're clear again. Go ahead.
Okay. I mean, you hear about the stereotype of Jewish guilt, where they will, feel guilty about neglecting their overbearing mother, but they don't feel guilty about being the driving force behind the Soviet Union, which resulted in tens of millions of people getting murdered. That goes right past them. Well, anyway, that sums it up, I think.
Who invented communism and why?
Karl Marx.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I can't really opine about that. I have not really read about the history of communism.
Well, let's move this towards your book then. Now we have a really excellent, kind of presentation to lead us right into what this is. So Solzhenitsyn and the right. How does this relate to the right wing today?
Okay. Well, the way I look at it is that Solzhenitsyn was an ethnocentrist, but his ethnos was Russians. Mm-hmm. And so, that makes him a little more palatable to our elites than saying, if your ethnos is white people. White people in the West, especially in America, we're a white diaspora. And so we don't really have any kind of national ethnos that can haul us together. I mean, at one point we did prior to 1965, but that's been lost. And so, if you're white and living in America, you can't really say you have an ethnic homeland like Solzhenitsyn does or did. Mm-hmm. So what I discovered when I was reading his works was that his struggles were against similar enemies that we have, that white nationalists or white dissidents face today. And there are many places in his works where you could strike out Russia and put in white or Western white or something like that. And it still makes sense. I noticed this in From Under the Rubble, which is a collection of essays, not just his essays, by the way. I noticed this in Warning to the West, and in chapter 14 of my book, I discussed that, and I actually quote him, and I strike out Russian and put in white just to demonstrate that it actually works. You could do this. And I know this is a lot also in his memoirs. You could just, he really cared about the Russian people. And in the same way that, say, Greg Johnson or Jared Taylor cares about whites. The only difference is that he has a homeland where there's borders and Russians are the majority, whereas we really don't have that. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of wanted to demonstrate that Solzhenitsyn really belongs to the dissident right. Now, the big job here is to just basically pull him out of the Overton window. Because if you go to the Solzhenitsyn Center or whatever, and it's run by his widow and I think Dan Mahoney, who's one of Solzhenitsyn's, is a Solzhenitsyn scholar and was involved in the Solzhenitsyn Reader and probably knew the man. Yeah. Their job is to protect the old man and make him seem much more mainstream, or very mainstream and palatable to our elites. And that's maybe reason why they're not publishing 200 Years Together. They're dragging their heels on that. They don't want to publish it. They actually managed to translate one chapter, and I think it might have been chapter 11 or 9 maybe. And when you read the chapter, it is the least offensive chapter in the book. I don't think that's a coincidence. I mean, if you actually read it, there's less criticism of Jews in that chapter than any of the others. So wow. I'm wondering about that. I don't know. I mean, this is a subjective thing, and people might disagree. But anyway, their job is to protect the old man. My job is to pull him out of the Overton window and place him in the right. I believe that if Solzhenitsyn had been born in 1970 in America, he'd be a white dissident now.
Yeah, got it. Mm-hmm. So go ahead.
Go on. No, go on.
Well, I was just asking what the intent of your book is, and I think that kind of throws light on that topic right there. Best case scenario, what effect would you like your book to have?
Well, there's another impact, or another intent I had behind it, and that is Solzhenitsyn's books tend to be very long. And so when people see him in the libraries or bookstores, they see something that's 800 pages, and most people are going to say, no, thanks. It's just too much. And it's not, these are dense pages. It's not like you have wide margins and all. I mean, the man intended to write a lot of literature. And he said at one point in Oak and the Calf, he didn't want to measure his literature by word count, but by cubic centimeter. I mean, that tells you something right there, that he just wanted to put it out there. And the result is that you have varying quality. You have some work that's great and some work that, may not be so great. So, for example, his Red Wheel, there's a lot in that Red Wheel that was very difficult to get through, very turgid. I mean, I think it needed a real editor. I can criticize it in that regard, because for him, more was more. And like, for example, the Bogrov Stolypin drama, he should have published that in a slender volume that would have been 180 pages, and just like he did with Leonard and Zurich. But instead, he just stuffed it in there and made a long book even longer. And when people will get intimidated by that. They look at Cancer Ward, in the First Circle, and the Red Wheel and the Gulag Archipelago. These are thick books.
Yeah.
And so what I want to do is read these works so they don't have to.
Yes.
I mean, I would love it if people were to actually read it, but I just know that most people are too busy. They're not going to read it. So if I give them a 200-page volume that condenses all the relevant stuff in all his major works, you can read that. You won't be a Solzhenitsyn expert, but hopefully, you'll be enlightened a little bit on what the man has to offer. So that's also a very practical intent I had.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's a big deal, and I really am grateful that you did that. I have the link in the chat, and also people can see at Antelope Hill. They can purchase your book there, antelopehill.com. It's a fabulous publisher. Publishes a lot of dissident content.
That's correct.
I actually met them at the White Art Collective Music Festival. Purchased a book, and actually hope to do some work with them in the future. Certainly as an illustrator. But anyway, so tell us then, how does this figure fit us today in the right? How can we interact with him, be inspired by him, use his teaching as his ideas for our cause?
Well, I think part of it is the fact that he was a dissident like us, but he was a dissident in the face of greater oppression and greater danger. Okay, we can't forget that. Although, I don't know, maybe we can give Merrick Garland some time and things will get worse. I don't know. But I mean, right now, the Soviet Union in the 40s, 50s was much more oppressive than the United States now. And so just the fact that he stood up to that and never wavered. Well, maybe his letter to the Russian leaders or Soviet leaders might have count as wavering. I'm not sure, but his overall stance was defiant, and he never really went away from that. So therefore, we can look at him. We can take inspiration in that regard. We could also look at the fact that he never really changed much. I mean, his political viewpoints, if you read the stuff from like Under the Rubble, and then you read interviews like 30 years later, it's the same stuff. I mean, he hasn't really changed. He was very consistent. He always had, I mean, I could be wrong. People who knew him might actually say, no, he actually changed his position. I don't know. But I mean, in general, though, from like the distant vantage point that I have, he was pretty consistent about his attitude, with his anti-progressive attitude. I think that's the most important thing. I mean, this is why, I have a soft spot for someone like Alex Jones or a lot of these mainstream quasi-right people. They at least pay lip service to anti-progress, and I'm like, okay, I can tolerate someone like that, even though I know I could still handle it. Whereas, so Solzhenitsyn had at his core a very anti-progressive, pro-conservative perspective. I mean, at one point he disavowed right and left in the Gulag Archipelago, and I mentioned this in the book. So I mean, like he didn't like political labels. So you could take that for what it's worth. But at the end of the day, he was an ethnocentrist, and that never changed. He was anti-progress, and that never changed. And he was a hardcore Christian, and that never changed. So, a guy like that is going to be on our side in any kind of political dispute.
No doubt.
So I think that's and the fact that he was able to stand up to the Jews. I don't think he ever really cucked to the Jews at all.
Right.
He was always his own man in the face of their vicious vitriol. And if you read Between Two Millstones, book 2, you will get pages and pages and pages of that. And I have a chapter in my book about his memoirs, and I go over that as well. But they were vicious towards him in the 80s, especially once August 1914 came out, and he just stood up to them, never gave an inch. And then he wrote 200 Years Together. So that was great. So I think he has that defiant edge that we can also find inspiration from.
It kind of inspires me. I'm just thinking through, like, for example, how different countries and different people's political parties have gone at each other all over the world. In every different country, and people just openly criticize their opponents. But for some reason, you can't touch the Jews. You can't talk about the Jews, the whole thing, and that to me is the biggest red flag that ever existed. And it draws so much attention to why. Why is it that when you tell the truth is, quote, anti-Semitic? I like the word counter-Semitic, but anyway, it draws so much attention to it, and I really strongly feel that we're at a moment here in history on October 8th, 2021, where we have to start doing this. We have to take Solzhenitsyn's lead and start don't give the Jews an inch. Call them out for where they need criticism and critique on everything. And, in a way that's sensible, in a way that is fair, in a way that isn't like hate driven, but just
of course.
Like, Republicans, Democrats, that they're constantly pointing out each other's faults all the time. Well, why can't whites talk about Jews in that regard? Or the way that any political party would. So the fact that they have this sort of privilege, this untouchable privilege, and it's something that has to happen. We're in a new phase now where we have to start opening up that can of worms and saying, but doing it in a way that honestly is just, like, frankly, mature and adult and sensible, and not, kind of emotion driven, but just simply, here are the facts, here are the facts, here are the facts. And granted, we all know that, the facts don't care about your feelings, and feelings don't care about your facts. And yeah, I know that there's the mind and the heart are constantly at war among our people. But I do feel like maybe that's, at least for me anyway, this is an inspiration I'm getting from your book, is that we should take his lead on that topic. You're muffled again, buddy. Maybe.
I said thank you for quoting Ben Shapiro.
Yeah. So, well, Richard Spencer said feelings don't care about your facts. So I thought that was an interesting play on those ideas. Yeah. But come on.
Well, Solzhenitsyn talks about this a little bit in 200 Years Together, where he says that Jewish writers would never hold back when criticizing Russians qua Russians.
Yeah. And
he gave some examples of some just really evil things that Jewish writers say about the Russian people. Mm-hmm. Okay. And he's saying, well, okay, fine. We get to respond now, don't we? Or is this a one-way street?
Yeah.
Now, if you look at the popular culture today, whites are criticized as white people. It happens all the time. Recently, Donald Moss, a Jew, who's part of the American Psychiatric Association, and so therefore is fairly influential, wrote a paper saying that whiteness is it's a parasitic condition to which there's no cure. There's no cure except to kill them. There's no cure. This sort of thing, and it gets accepted. Nobody says boo. This is just
right.
horribly offensive and racist.
Yes.
But if I were to say, oh, well, Jewishness is a parasitic condition, well, then, off Amazon I go, losing my career, I lose this, I lose that. The double standard is annoying. And so, you know, Solzhenitsyn would have none of that. I mean, but at the same time, it must be said that Solzhenitsyn was always very upfront and friendly with the Jews that he knew. And if you look at a lot of the people that helped him, especially early on, a lot of them were Jews, because a lot, you know, by the 1960s, the Soviet Union had kind of turned on Jews a little bit. And so therefore Jews were suffering lack of opportunity that they had in the 40s and early 50s when Stalin was alive. And so there were quite a few Jews who were getting a little ticked off at the Soviet Union as well. And so Solzhenitsyn found some natural allies, like the Rubin character from In the First Circle and Prisoners, this play Prisoners, is a bigger than life character. He's Jewish, of course, and he's fairly positive, even though he promotes communism. He's a nice guy in the book, and he's based on a real person. And there were others too, and you know, not a few, but I think his wife might be a half or a quarter Jewish. I'm not sure. So his interpersonal relationships with Jews, as far as I know, were always positive, or he always tried to make them positive.
Your audio is starting to go out again. If you can just
is this better?
Yeah,
is this better?
All right, go ahead.
So his personal relationships were always positive, and you know, when you read Jewish writers, a lot of them will say that Solzhenitsyn was no anti-Semite. He was too dignified or too well educated, to this or to that, too classy. And you know, other people have suspicions, and other people called him an anti-Semite, like Kathy Young. But you know, he also exhibits a lot of respect and appreciation for Jewish accomplishment. He has positive Jewish characters, especially in August 1914. There's an engineer, Arkangelovsky, I think his name is. It's a hard name to pronounce. But he's not like the Rhea character in Dickens's Our Mutual Friend, who was just like saint-like, but at the same time very thoughtful, very congenial, nice guy who was very suspicious of the Reds prior to the revolution. And he's a very positive character based on a real benefactor of his mother, who was Jewish. So you know, he gives them their due, and I do too. I mean, you know, you got to respect what they've been able to accomplish. And you know, I understand that, you know, without them, our culture would be cheapened quite a bit. I really believe that, because they offer so much support to things like classical music. Or how many people in hospitals are Jewish who run hospitals and make them work efficiently? They're Jewish. You don't know it because it's all under the hood, right? I mean, there's a lot that they give in the non-political spheres that is quite positive. It's just that in the political sphere, you know, they become problematic because they push for communism. They push for all these things that are dysgenic to the white population, and they do it viciously and unapologetically, and they fight hard, and they're well funded, and they're formidable. It's insipid. Yeah, so it's just pretty terrible. But the 200 Years Together shows very clearly that these people are not innocent. They're every bit as guilty as they claim whites are, dealing with atrocity and other things. I mean, Ron Unn says that Jews are the greatest mass murderers per capita in the world. Now, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if you can prove that, but I mean,
I think it can be proved, but that's within a certain historic time frame. I mean, if you look at, you know, India or China or the Middle East, the Muslim world, how many people have died in their conquest? Oh my God!
If you talk about the 20th century only, I don't know. Right. So anyway, that's a way to look at it. And Solzhenitsyn never clucked to that. He was always very firm. And there were parts of 200 Years Together when I wish he would, you know, take a harder line. And I point this out in the book, where Solzhenitsyn tries really hard to let the Jews off the hook about certain things. And I wasn't quite buying it. Then again, he did the research and I didn't, so I'm not going to challenge him, but I'm like, something doesn't seem right. He seems like he's straining his logic a little bit. But this was mostly in the February Revolution, which he blames mostly on the Russians. But then later on in that same chapter, he brings up a lot of Jewish names, and I'm like, well, guy, you know, it's not too convincing, but you know, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But then once he gets to the chapter on the October Revolution, you know, you really can't divorce that from the Jews. I mean, the Jews were everywhere in that, and they were extremely enthusiastic about the Soviet Union and bringing down the Tsar and bringing down the provisional government, which they had no reason to do, because Solzhenitsyn points out that the provisional government was not anti-Semitic at all. They were philo-Semitic. Okay. And Jews were having plenty of opportunities with them as
Yep.
well. So why would the Jews as a people want the Russian, the October Revolution when they already had the February one? Well, there was no real need for it. Yet it happened because you had people like Trotsky and Lenin and others, Zinoviev and Kamenev and Stalin, who were desperate for power.
Yeah.
And to get that power, they could only seize it, and they did. And also, sadly, they were financed by Jews worldwide, and that gave them the edge in the Civil War. The Civil War was a vicious, bloody conflict that, our Civil War was what, 600,000 guys died? For them, it was like 4 times that number.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just utterly vicious. I think what's the name of the book? It was a famous movie. Dr. Zhivago has a few scenes. I didn't like Dr. Zhivago, the book, but the movie was good, but the book I didn't like. But there were some brutal chapters that covered the Civil War that should be read. And that was some very, very gripping stuff. So anyway, the Soviets had the Red Army managed to get better funding than the whites did, and that's how they managed to win. I think that was the big factor. And it's tragic, and a lot of their benefactors were Jews, like Schiff, the guy from the ADL back then, who met President Taft and refused to shake his hand. The man who helped fund the Japanese war effort against the Russians in 1905.
Wow.
What an evil bastard.
I know.
He just wanted the Russians to get defeated. And the thing is, he goes to Taft at one point and says, look, you need to pressure the Russians to not put the Jews in the pale. And Taft wouldn't do it. He gave Schiff a letter from the Tsar saying that we do this because when the Jews are among us, they sell alcohol to our people and get them drunk. Right. They cajole these people into giving them their grain or selling them their grain, and that leads to famines. And that led to a famine in Belarus at like 1904 or something like that, where people were dying or starving largely because the Jews were Jewish, unscrupulous, profiteering Jews. And I'm not saying all Jews are like that, but I mean a good these individuals who were doing this were managing to get them to sell grain so they can make alcohol for them to consume. And we all know the Russian peasant has a weakness for alcohol. It's a natural weakness. They can't do anything about it. And yet they were being preyed upon by this group of people. And they mentioned some other things about how the Jewish presence disrupts Russian society. And all of this was proven correct with the October Revolution. Because once the Tsar fell, once the Tsar was gone, all the things that they were predicting kind of sort of happened. You see, in other words, people like Schiff, I forgot his first name, maybe Arnold, wanted Jewish conquest. He wanted Jewish control of Russia. So they painted as fighting anti-Semitism, freeing the Jews from the pale, and all this humanitarian stuff. But what he really wanted was conquest, and he was willing to kill or willing to pay money to get people killed to do it, like he did in 1905 with the Japanese. There's no excuse for that.
Mass murderers, basically.
Yeah, I mean, well, he paid money for this sort of thing to happen. I don't think he ever killed anyone himself, but he is actually a well-remembered guy. And as soon as by the Jews, and as soon as the Soviet Union was formed, he started throwing money at him. I mean, he had a lot of it. He's like the George Soros of his day, I guess.
This is what I'm trying to point out: is this is the Jewish methodology? They never do it themselves. They always create committees and businesses and organizations and parties, etc. Those organizations then have sub-organizations, and there's a kind of a long rabbit hole that you have to go down before you finally come to the person in charge. And it's more than not a Jew. So these are systems that are very confusing to people today. I have a very close friend who is, everybody right now is like being forced to wake up. When I say everybody, I guess I generally mean like normies. And they're being slapped hard in the face over and over, and they realize, my God, how did we get? It's like we're in the 11th hour of tyranny and the end of America, and they're thinking, oh, what do I do? How do I stop this? And so, I think you can't really fix a problem if you don't understand the problem, and having to get around all these mental blocks about, like, I don't know how to say it, but the kind of brainwashing, specifically Christians, on protecting the Jews. Meanwhile, this is what's going on. So that, this is a bigger discussion, but it's an important discussion, I think, related to what we're talking about, is what are the methodologies through which we can wake up our people to this crisis infestation.
Well, I mean, the problem, one of the problems that makes it such one of the things that makes it such an intractable problem is the fact that there are quite a few Jews out there who do mean well, and quite a few quite a few very talented people. And when you work with them, you're going to be in a position where you're going to be on their side. You're going to appreciate them. So if you are in medical school, or if you're a doctor, a physician, and a third of your colleagues are Jewish and you get along great with them, and your boss is a Jew and you get along great with them, and everything goes along really well, and you respect them as colleagues, their competence and stuff, you're not going to be buying into these things that I'm saying very easily, because you're going to say, well, what are you talking about? I don't, I know plenty of Jews. I'm surrounded by them, and I feel great with them.
Right. And you see, the Jews, and so they're all great, and there's no problem at all.
Well, it's the thing is this, the Jews have a weakness for, as a group, the Ashkenazim, in my opinion, and I'm speaking about them as a group because God knows they speak about whites as group, so I'm just giving as good as I'm getting here. I get annoyed, sorry. So anyway, the thing is that they losing my train of thought here. As a group, they have a weakness for left-wing politics, and the subset of them that have that weakness are those who have the will to power. Okay, so those who have the will to power, those who are willing to go into politics and lead, tend to have a very strong weakness for left-wing politics, which is rooted in hatred of whites, or desire to have revenge against whites for things like the Jewish Holocaust, or for whatever's been bugging them for the last couple hundred years, or whatever, or several hundred years. And so most Jews don't really have that. Most Jews just want to practice their violin all day, or they want to play chess or something, or they want to just have their productive life going smoothly, and they may support the ones who have the will to power, but they themselves don't have the will to power. So when you meet them, you say, wow, this person is incredible. This person is so intelligent and so charming and so funny. Wow, I want to be around them. And, so therefore philo-Semitism is a very easy thing to pick up if you're white, because, I mean, God knows that's what it was for me. And I still have a remnant of that in my mind. I mean, there are still, there are still things I do appreciate about them, and I just wish that they wouldn't go into politics. Because they're just deadly when it comes to that. They're the worst. But when they're not in politics, they can actually do some great work, and a lot of it is going to be under the hood, because you're not going to know that maybe the best anesthesiologist who I don't know, maybe wrote books about the theory of anesthesiology in the 60s and 70s and influenced every anesthesiologist from then on was a Jew. You won't know that, because that's impossible to know, or you'd have to do the research to root it out. You see, so therefore they make a lot of contributions that are under the hood. But if you're in that milieu, well, you know about it. And you're going to appreciate that, and you'll stand by them. And same thing with the entertainment industry and other places where they actually thrive. So that's why it's a very difficult problem to get through, because you got to understand that there's a difference between the will to power and people who don't have the will to power. And once you separate that, you realize it's the people with the will to power. They're the ones who are evil. The ones who aren't like that aren't evil. They may support them. That might give them their vote. Which is difficult to also to justify, because they're Democrats. But a lot of white people are Democrats. So are we going to call all whites who vote Democrat, are they all evil? 30 million of them? I mean, that's a hard call. I wouldn't do that.
Right.
So, I mean, they vote. I remember a Jewish woman once told me she votes Democrat because that's what Jews do. And she never really thought about it.
Right. Naturally.
She was a nice lady. Nice lady, very, very, very nice lady, and I have no problem with her, but that's what she said. And I'm like, I was like, yeah, thanks.
Honestly, if we were to replace the word Jew with white, it's the same problem. We have to speak in generalities or generalisms or what have you. Whites behave in certain ways, Jews behave in certain ways, blacks.
Well, maybe, but white people, I mean, the thing is that blacks and Jews especially will speak about whites, qua whites, and they won't have a filter. they'll say all the horrible things about us, and they're encouraged to do so, or at least tacit. This engenders tacit improvement. Even under Trump, it did, and that's what critical race theory is. It's just a racial insult after racial insult that we just have to take like chumps, you know. And so, but when we start speaking about blacks or Jews as a whole, then all of a sudden we get in trouble. And I'm like, that's got to change. That can't last, because that's going to get millions of people really freaking angry once the Democrats screw up the economy. And I mean, I don't know if they will, but there's a good chance they will eventually, assuming they'll steal 2024 again in 2028, and they'll have 12 years of uninterrupted corruption. And at that point, you know, who knows what the unemployment rate will be like. I mean, there's a lot of bad things that could happen. And if our economy goes to crap like it did in the 1929, then, you know, who knows what kind of anger we're going to look for people to blame. And then all of a sudden the anti-Semitism will ramp up, and then people will start saying, why is there anti-Semitism? And I'm like, I'm telling you now.
Yes.
Listen, I'm telling you now why.
Yes.
And they'll say it's so irrational. I'm like, no, it's not. It's not irrational.
Right.
You know, and I'm one of the reasons why I'm saying this is because I don't want violent outbreaks. I don't want like another pogrom to happen. I want everyone to get along. You know, I'm just trying to give as I get, and try to explain that blacks and Jews especially have their flaws too, have their issues too. It's not just white people. I mean, you can't just say, you know, censor whites and then not censor everybody else. I mean, this is oppression, and eventually, you know, you're going to get blowback. And I'm hoping that if we can talk about it as much as possible, that blowback really won't happen. We'll find ways to, you know, reasonably deal with this issue. I don't know. Maybe I'm being just maybe that's pie in the sky.
You're basically saying, in a sense, what I said earlier about now is the time that we have to break the doors down. We have to say, listen, this has to be talked about. Let's be sensible about it here. You know, by creating this book, you're sort of saying, okay, here's an excellent starting point. Here's a guy that went through this 100 years ago. He not only did he go through it, but he went through it like hell, like 100 times harder. This is a warning post to all people involved in this issue. So read the book, you know, get involved in this dialogue. You know,
maybe you could write the foreword to the second edition. That sounded really good.
I would love to.
Can I add something though? I mean, the Solzhenitsyn and the right is not just about the JQ. I mean, it's mentioned in the 200 years. It's all over the 200 years chapters, and there's 4 of those. And in the memoirs, in memoirs chapter, it gets mentioned a lot, and it gets mentioned a lot in the August 1914 chapter. But you know, he talks about a lot of his theories of ethnocentrism in From Under the Rubble. Yeah, that has nothing to do with the Jewish question, and that's extremely interesting stuff. It talks about, like, I think there's one about the, you know, mutually forgiving other peoples, and he was talking in that about the Poles and how Russians and the Poles have a very complicated history, and by complicated I mean not good. And he says how he's more than happy to accept the faults of his own throughout history, but the Poles must do the same. You know, and he's not hearing that from them. At least that's what he said in 1972. Things might have changed now, but you know, so that there is something there to be thought about. It's not just all about the JQ. I think also the chapter on Matryona's house also deals with a very pure form of ethnocentrism that is very touching, that is just absent. I mean, that which, you know, all the cynical stuff we were talking about is just absent from. It's just a wonderful story. So, I mean, there's much more to it than just the JQ.
Wonderful. Well, you're adding to the sort of repertoire of books on the Jewish question, the JQ, and it helps to move us forward, you know, by adding to the literature, to the discussion. I think certainly, I think perhaps we should have a part 2 to this, maybe even bring in some other people and try to get some reactions to the book. That would be, you know, that'd be wonderful. I also want to say, please check out the other books on Antelope Hill. There's not a lot of publishers out there that put out content that, you know, is sort of courageous enough to say the things that need to be said. And Spencer, you're so eloquent and you're so fair in the way that you present these things. On the right wing, we have a lot of hotheads and a lot of reason to be angry about these things. But, I don't think sometimes that's more damaging, and it plays into the victim kind of, mentality. It gives fuel to the left to say, oh, look, see, they're Nazis and blah, 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 all that nonsense. But let's try to create if you want to sit at the adult table, come on over here and have a reasonable, rational conversation. Look at the data, look at the history, and let's try to prevent the terrors of the past, because that's actually what this is really all about.
Yeah, because, of course, whites in history are not innocent. I mean, we've committed atrocity. We've done bad things in the past. We should make it clear that other people have too. We're not alone in that. But we're not without sin. And the Jewish question it's very tempting to turn you into an a-hole. I mean, it's very tempting to get angry and bitter and to suddenly start just being very, very snarky. And I feel the temptation. You got to resist it, because you always have to be as disinterested as you can. You always have to separate yourself from your subject matter, admit when you're right, admit when you're wrong, and try to find truth. And, it's very easy to get frustrated when you're being censored, when you say what you think is true, and that just makes your bitterness worse and worse. And there's a vicious circle that just, will take some of our folks into a very nasty avenue of the JQ. And that's so revolting that I'm like, no, don't go there. No oven jokes, please stop. That's inhumane. Don't do that.
Well,
and fortunately, you don't get any of that at Countercurrents, and you don't get any of that at the Occidental Observer or the other sites I like to go to. So.
Well, this has been a brilliant conversation. I know you and I could just jam on this topic for a long time, but I want to thank you very, very much for coming today. Thank the people in the chat also for your time, and certainly get involved in this dialogue. It's up to you. Please share this video on your networks, subscribe, get involved, and certainly pick up a copy over at Antelope Hill, Solzhenitsyn and the Right by Spencer J. Quinn. Thank you so much, Spencer, for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's been great. I really appreciate it.
Excellent. Okay. See you next time on American Zarathustra.